Hey everyone, my name is Brian, and for my project I decided to make a push-in doorknob. The reason that I chose this as my project is because my doorknob got broken and replaced not too long ago, and I saw an opportunity to improve upon its design. Regular door handles require a twisting motion, which can be challenging for individuals with physical limitations like the elderly or people when they have their hands preoccupied. To address this, I developed a doorknob with a simple push-in function. This push-in function simplifies the process of opening a door, enhances accessibility and convenience. Whether you're carrying a lot of items, dealing with mobility issues, or simply looking for a more efficient design, this modification helps make everyday life a little bit easier.
I first started with making the ramp surface, which is the purple part you saw in the beginning of the animation. I first got a piece of aluminum stock and shaped it down to 60mm in diameter. I then used an end mill to create a step cut into it, which would be the ramp itself close to about 35 degrees from the z-axis. I then used a surface grinder to smooth out any imperfections and create a clean surface. I went back to the lathe and with the parting tool I cut the piece into its appropriate length. To create the block, I placed it in a collet block and tried my best to make it parallel with the ramp. Then, with a file, I shaped down the edges as needed to make it fit better with the original handle. Although it wasn't perfect, it still came out pretty good and I was happy with the result. The pushrod was also made from aluminum stock. I shaped down its outer diameter to 1/4 of an inch and its inner diameter to 1/8 of an inch. Then, using the turning tool and file, I was able to create a nice rounded end. The diameter of the stock was small enough for me to not need a vise on the mill and created a hole for where I wanted the spring to go into. Then, with the cutting and turning tool, I was able to shave it down to its appropriate length. I was very happy with how it turned out. For the case, I decided to make it out of HDPE. I first shaved one end down to 25mm in diameter and bored it out with a 7/8 inch Fastener bit. I then flipped that end and attached it to a collet in order to cut off the excess material with the cutting tool and saw. I then shaped the outside of the part to mimic the geometry of the original case using both the cutting tool and turning tool. I created a hole with the 7/8 inch Fastener bit again and used the turning tool to bore out the center of the part so it would mate with the handle appropriately. To finish it off, I sanded down the outside to give a nice and smooth finish. Using the collet block again, I was able to create a hole to guide the pushrod as it's being pressed down. I then applied 2 coats of gray spray paint on the outside to give it a nice aesthetic. Overall, I really like how this part came out. The handle was made out of wood I found in the shop. I first cut out the shape of the handle using a bandsaw and smoothed it out with a belt sander. With the drill press, I was able to create a hole for the pushrod. After that, I coated the handle with 2 layers of stain to give it a nice finish and let it dry. Finally came the assembly portion of the project. I first placed the ramp cylinder onto the handle to see if it fit nicely. I gave it a twist to see if it functioned properly and it did. I then aligned the case to the ramp cylinder in order for the pushrod to engage correctly. After that, I marked the alignment with a Sharpie so I wouldn't forget. Next, I poured an even amount of Part A and Part B epoxy onto a piece of cardboard. After thoroughly mixing, I applied it on the surface of the door handle using the hollow cylinder for support and making sure I sealed off the parts properly. The pushrod was pressed into the handle and sealed off with epoxy as well. Unfortunately, the spring wouldn't fit into the pushrod, so I had to bind the spring onto the case, then the handle onto the spring. Here's what the final assembly looks like after the epoxy has set and dried.
So unfortunately, the pushrod kept getting jammed onto the ramp surface when I was testing out the project. I believe that this is due to it not being steep enough, and which is causing the pushrod to dig into it. Some of the changes I would make would be sharpening the angle of the cut to around 25 degrees and making the pushrod 1/4 inch in diameter all the way to hopefully avoid this issue and make it functional. Although the prototype didn't work, this project was a good learning experience for me and gave me valuable insight into proper design and manufacturing techniques which I can use in future projects. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace!